Have you ever seen a hug, not dramatic, not loud, but one that made the whole room stop breathing? Not because it was too much, but because no one had ever given it to the one who needed it most? This is the story of a boy no one dared to approach, and a waitress who didn't ask for permission. She simply knelt down and held him in front of everyone. If you believe that public acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't always come from a parent or a teacher, can sometimes come from someone brave enough to kneel down and see, like and subscribe to stay till the end, because today, one unsanctioned hug unraveled a lifetime of silence. Victor Langley hated birthdays. Not because of age or cake, or the forced small talk that always accompanied these events, but because they were loud. And loudness made his son disappear. The restaurant was packed tonight, a high-end private venue Victor had helped fund for one of his strategic partners. Their son was turning 11, and the party was an affair to impress. Gold-trimmed menus, a string quartet by the wall, waiters moving like synchronized clockwork. Parents mingled in designer suits. Children laughed and darted between tables like birds freed from cages. Cameras flashed. Champagne flutes clinked. Everyone was here to be seen. Everyone, except Asher. Victor's son, 10 years old, pale and small for his age, sat alone at a table near the back wall. Not a child's table. Not the adults either. Just a spare place, where no one else had chosen to sit. He wasn't playing with the others. He wasn't watching the magic show that had just started. He was staring at the ceiling fan, eyes glazed, hands locked tightly under his legs like he was holding himself in place. Victor glanced toward him for a moment, then quickly turned back to his conversation with a fellow investor. Asher wasn't screaming, so things were fine. The boy had been instructed repeatedly not to make a scene, not to wander, not to bother the guests. Behind Victor, one of the waitresses passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Her name was June Harper, 31. She had a quiet way of working that made her nearly invisible, unless you were watching closely. And June had been watching Asher since he walked in. She noticed how he flinched at the pop of the champagne cork. How he shrunk deeper into his seat every time a group of children shrieked. How he looked not at people, but around them, trying to find somewhere soft to land. He hadn't touched his drink. He hadn't moved in 20 minutes. When the cake arrived, a two-tier spectacle with sparklers and singing, the entire crowd circled around the birthday boy. The room pulsed with clapping, lights, movement, noise. Someone pulled Asher closer to the group, not understanding. He backed away, hands clamped over his ears. Another child brushed past him, not noticing. Asher stumbled sideways, body pinched between a chair and the wall. Then he did something June could not unsee. He crouched. Like he wanted to vanish. No one saw him. The cameras were aimed the other way. The parents were cheering. The only person who looked, briefly, was Victor. His eyes flicked toward the back wall. He caught sight of his son, hunched and pressed against the corner like a whisper no one heard. And he frowned. Not with concern, but with restraint. He hated when Asher did that. The boy had been told over and over to control his reactions. To stay seated. To be polite. Victor turned back toward the front of the room. Someone had just made a toast. He smiled for the photo. June, however, didn't turn away. From the far end of the room, she saw Asher rock slightly, shoulders trembling in rhythm with the overhead lights. His fingers dug into his knees. His lips were parted, as if he were silently repeating something to himself. A mantra? A countdown? She didn't know. But she did know what panic looked like. And she knew what it felt like to be alone in a room full of people who didn't notice you breaking. The tray in her hands wobbled slightly as she paused. She wasn't serving Asher's table. Technically, she wasn't supposed to leave her section at all. But something in her legs moved before she could think. And though that moment hadn't arrived yet, the one that would make the whole room stop, it was already forming quietly, at the edge of everything. June didn't remember setting down the tray. Later, when someone asked what made her step out of bounds, she wouldn't be able to say. There was no plan. No protocol. No whisper in her ear telling her it was okay. There was just the image. A boy barely 10, crouched in a suit too stiff for his body, breathing like he was underwater. His hands trembled against his thighs. His fingernails, bitten and raw, had turned inward, pushing red marks into his own skin. His lower lip was split where he'd been chewing it too hard, a tiny thread of blood tracing the edge. And still, no one noticed. That made it worse. The room had only grown louder. Guests leaned over tables to shout stories. Children squealed as they tore into presents. A photographer was snapping group shots near the cake, urging people to bunch together. The light on the camera pulsed like a warning beacon, unnoticed by everyone but the boy on the floor. June stepped closer. She didn't hesitate. Her apron brushed past someone's handbag, and she ignored the way the air shifted behind her as she left her assigned section. 3 steps. Then 4. She reached him just as he started rocking, the kind of rhythmic, silent motion that said, "I'm trying not to fall apart." "Asher," she whispered, not to get his attention, but as if saying his name might soften the moment. But he didn't look up. She bent to the knees slowly, gently, like approaching a wounded animal that might run at the wrong move. No one had told her what he needed. But she could see what he didn't: space, silence, permission. June didn't ask anyone for permission. She opened her arms, quietly, deliberately, and pulled him into her chest. The boy didn't resist. He folded into her body with the instinct of someone who hadn't been held in a very long time. His arms didn't move. His hands stayed clenched, but his head dropped onto her collarbone like it had always known where to go. His breath came in short, hot bursts, as if he had just surfaced from something deep. Around them, something changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't announced. But the tone of the room shifted. Laughter tapered off. Glasses stopped clinking. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. People turned. At first, just a few guests noticed, the ones standing closest. A woman in a red dress squinted toward the center of the floor, confused. A man tilted his head and elbowed his partner. "Is she hugging that boy?" Another guest murmured, "Isn't that Langley's kid?" Then someone near the cake stopped singing. Then the photographer lowered his camera. June stayed still. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. Her hand pressed gently to Asher's back, rising and falling with his uneven breathing. She didn't try to make it look like anything it wasn't. No justifying gesture. No smile for the audience. She simply held him. As if they were alone. As if the world hadn't just begun to rotate around them. The whispers grew louder. "She's a waitress. She can't do that. What is she thinking?" But no one moved closer. Not even the parents. Not even the host. And in the distance, standing with a half-empty glass of wine and a tightening jaw, was Victor Langley. He wasn't used to scenes. He didn't allow them. He didn't like attention that wasn't on his terms. His eyes locked on June, kneeling on the floor of a $1 million restaurant, apron crumpled, hair loose, arms around his son. His first instinct was outrage. How dare she? But the words never made it to his lips. Because Asher, his Asher, who hadn't let anyone touch him in years, was still. Not stiff. Not panicked. Not recoiling. Still. Victor took a slow step forward. Then another. He was halfway across the room when he saw it clearly. Asher's fingers had finally relaxed. His hands no longer dug into his skin. The tremor in his shoulders had quieted. His face, tucked under June's chin, looked soft. And in that moment, Victor felt something strange claw at the edge of his composure. He didn't recognize it right away. It wasn't anger. Or confusion. It was something quieter. Something older. A memory? No, More like a question. Why hadn't I? He froze mid-step. Guests watched him, waiting for his cue, to laugh, to scold, to move on. But he didn't give one. He just stood there, staring at the woman who had done what he, for 10 years, had never dared to do in public. She'd held his son. Not because she had permission. Not because it looked right. But because it was right. Someone near the bar finally said what everyone else had been thinking. "What is she doing?" The words broke the silence like a stone thrown into water. But they didn't ripple. They just landed, heavy, sharp, and unanswered. The man who had spoken took a half-step forward, his tone bordering on outrage, but no one followed. No one echoed his protest. Instead, the air in the room thickened, like people were holding their breath, not from scandal, but from something more sacred, more uncertain. A moment had taken hold, and no one quite knew how to interrupt it. On the floor, June didn't flinch, didn't explain, didn't so much as glance at the man. Her arms remained wrapped around Asher, one hand now resting lightly at the nape of his neck, her palm breathing warmth into a place that had probably only known tension. The boy hadn't moved. He wasn't pulling away. Wasn't squirming. His body, once a tight coil of panic, was beginning to soften against hers. His breathing had slowed to a quiet, steady rhythm, his chest rising and falling like waves after a storm. His fingers, which had dug so deeply into his own skin just minutes before, now lay open, curved loosely against her side. His shoulders no longer shook. His brow had relaxed. His eyes were closed. Not clenched, just closed. Peacefully. Trustingly. As if, in this public, blindingly bright room, he had finally found somewhere dark and safe enough to rest. No one moved. A glass clinked gently on a table and was met with silence. A child whispered something to his mother, but she didn't answer. Even the servers had paused, unsure of what this was, a disruption or something more precise. Something more necessary than service. Then came the footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate. Victor Langley walked toward the center of the restaurant, through the wide open space that had, moments earlier, been filled with laughter and celebration. He walked like a man stepping into weather he hadn't prepared for, alert, unsure, guarded. He stopped a few feet from them. From this distance, he could see everything. The way June's hand wasn't forcing anything, only resting, as if to say, "I'm here if you need me." The way Asher's body had curved inward, not with fear, but with relief. The way their breathing had synchronized without effort, like two notes from different instruments finally landing in the same key. Victor didn't speak. Not yet. He just stared. It had been years since he'd seen his son touched by someone, anyone, without flinching. Even longer since he'd seen Asher yield to it. He tried to catalog it. To make sense of it. The waitress had no credentials. No training in special needs. No official reason to be near the boy. She wasn't a therapist. She wasn't family. But here she was. Kneeling on a marble floor, in the middle of a party she didn't belong to, holding his son as if the world wasn't watching. Victor's chest tightened. Not from embarrassment. Not from the scrutiny of his guests. But from something far more difficult to name. Recognition. Because deep down, under the layers of status and image and unspoken rules about behavior and boundaries, Victor knew what he was seeing. Knew it like muscle memory. Knew it like a scent from childhood. This was not a spectacle. It was shelter. The kind of shelter he himself had longed for once. Quiet. Uncomplicated. Immediate. Offered not because it was earned, but because someone cared enough not to wait for permission. His mouth opened. Closed. He blinked once, slowly, as if trying to catch up to what he was witnessing. Still, June didn't look up. She didn't need to. She wasn't performing. She wasn't afraid. In fact, she seemed unaware of the people standing around them, the murmurs growing quieter, the tension hanging in the air like a held breath. All that existed in her world, in this one suspended moment, was the boy in her arms. Victor looked around. His guests were watching him now, not her. Waiting to see how he'd react. Would he be angry? Dismissive? Would he pull the boy away? Would he call for the manager? File a complaint? He did none of those things. Instead, he took one more step forward, not enough to intrude, but just close enough to see something that shattered him. A tear. Just one. It had traced a silent line down the boy's cheek and fallen into the fabric of June's apron. Victor didn't remember the last time he'd seen his son cry without screaming, or the last time someone had stayed. He exhaled through his nose, a quiet, trembling sound that no one but himself heard. Then he did something no one expected. He stopped walking. He didn't speak. Didn't move. He simply stood there, watching. And for the first time in a very long time, he saw his son. Really saw him. Not the diagnosis. Not the challenge. Not the problem to be managed or the embarrassment to be hidden. Just a boy. A 10-year-old boy, finally being held. The party was over. The string quartet had packed up. The last guests had taken their coats and murmured awkward goodbyes. Staff were clearing dishes and polishing the last smudges off crystal glassware. The room, once a sea of glittering conversation, now echoed with a quiet clink of silverware and the occasional soft sweep of a broom. Victor Langley hadn't moved. He stood near the main exit, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a glass of water he hadn't touched. His tie was loosened now, his posture less rigid. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular, just staring out the tall front windows as if the answers to something long unresolved might be waiting in the parking lot. Then he turned. June was wiping down a table near the back, alone. She looked up briefly, sensing his gaze, then returned to her work without flinching. There was no guilt in her expression. No apology. Only calm. He watched her for a moment longer before speaking. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "A word." She looked up again, this time setting the rag down. There was no nervousness in her movement, only care. She untied her apron as she walked toward him, folding it neatly in her hands like it was armor she no longer needed. They stepped out through the side door into the cool night. The breeze was crisp, slicing through the heat that had built up inside. A line of parked cars shimmered under the glow of overhead lamps. The air smelled faintly of lavender and exhaust. Victor didn't speak right away. He took a few steps toward the curb, then turned, facing her. He didn't tower over her, though he was taller, but something about the quiet made them feel eye to eye. "I need to ask you something," he said. "And I'd like you to answer honestly." June nodded once, hands still wrapped around the folded apron at her waist. "Why did you do that?" he asked. "In front of everyone?" There was no accusation in his tone, but also no softness. It was the voice of a man used to being in control, of outcomes, of narratives, of people. But June didn't look away. She met his eyes, steady and clear, then said, "Because everyone keeps waiting for him to be okay before they reach for him. They wait for him to act normal. To calm down. To fit in." She paused, voice low but certain. "But no one realizes, it's the reaching that helps him become okay." Victor stared at her, expression unreadable. "That hug," she continued, "wasn't a reward. It was a beginning. And someone had to go first." The wind tugged at her hair, lifting a few strands away from her face. She didn't brush them back. Victor stood very still. For a long moment, he said nothing. The night stretched between them, full of things he had never spoken aloud. And then, his shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, but in something slower. Something closer to surrender. He looked down at his hands, as if surprised to find them empty, and then back at her. "When I was a boy," he said, his voice softer now, "I used to sit at the back of the classroom. Every day." June stayed quiet. "I didn't raise my hand," he continued. Didn't speak unless I was called on. I would draw little boxes on the corner of my paper, one inside the other. 4 hours. He gave a short, breathless laugh, the kind that sounds like it's remembering pain too old to name. One day, he said, a teacher came up behind me. I thought I was in trouble. I expected her to say I was being rude or strange. But instead, she knelt beside me and said, "I see you." That's all. He swallowed. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't even say thank you. But I remembered. He looked up at her now, not as a billionaire, not as a father trying to save face, but as a man holding something fragile in his chest. I haven't thought about that moment in decades, he said. Not until tonight. June didn't move. Didn't speak. She let the weight of his words settle in the space between them like dust. Then, almost as if to himself, Victor added, I think. I used to wish someone would have done what you did. For me. That sentence hung in the air like a crack in something polished, a glimpse of what had been hidden too long. June's voice, when it returned, was gentle. Maybe tonight, she said, you saw what it looks like when someone finally does. Victor exhaled slowly. And for once, he didn't try to fix anything. Didn't retreat behind logic or authority. He just nodded once and let the silence stretch, not as a wall, but as a kind of acknowledgement. They stood like that for another moment. Two people, from opposite worlds, sharing the same truth. 1 month later, the restaurant space was transformed. Gone were the gilded place settings and wine-soaked linens. In their place stood soft beanbags, low wooden tables, shelves of sensory toys, and soft light cascading through linen drapes. There was no stage, no microphone, no formal podium to draw attention to one voice over another. The room had a new name now, the Quiet First. Victor and June had launched it quietly, no press release, no gala, just a modest announcement on the restaurant's website and a few discreet emails to families who might need such a place. The concept was simple, a gathering space where sensitivity wasn't a weakness, where the most anxious, the most tender, the most overwhelmed would be seen first, not last. Not after they'd gotten used to it. Not after they'd learned to hide their discomfort. First. It was opening day. June arrived early. She wore no apron today, just a cream cardigan over soft jeans and a delicate necklace shaped like an open hand. She moved through the space lighting small lamps and smoothing the corners of floor mats. Her footsteps were slow and mindful. This wasn't work. This was something else. Victor arrived not long after, walking beside Asher. The boy clutched a soft plush fox in one hand, the fabric worn from years of being carried, chewed, and loved in silence. He looked up at the building, then at the open door, his eyes wide and uncertain. But he walked in. He didn't bolt for a corner. He didn't cover his ears. He stepped cautiously, slowly, taking in the space. There were already a few children sitting at the circle of beanbags, most accompanied by parents or aides. Soft acoustic music played in the background, nearly inaudible under the hum of a floor fan. Asher stood still. June didn't approach him. Neither did Victor. They had agreed on that. No pressure, no guiding hand, no pushing toward engagement. Just space. Then, without prompting, a girl who looked no older than 6 stood up from the circle. She had strawberry blonde curls and wore a sundress patterned with daisies. She glanced toward her father, who gave a tiny nod from the couch. She walked straight to Asher. He didn't back away. His arms stayed at his sides. The fox in his hand drooped slightly. The girl stopped right in front of him. And she hugged him. Just like that. No ceremony. No introduction. No speech. Her small arms circled his shoulders and held, firm and certain, like this was something she just knew to do. Asher blinked. He didn't move at first, caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. His shoulders rose slightly, as if preparing for discomfort, but it didn't come. Instead, he let the fox slip from his fingers. And then slowly he raised his arms, hesitant, jerky, and hugged her back. June's hand flew to her mouth. She had seen many things in her life, but nothing like this. There had been no adult guidance, no planned activity, just instinct, kindness. A child who knew somehow that another child needed anchoring. Victor sat on a cushioned bench nearby, frozen. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't record. He simply watched, stunned by the image. His son, the boy who never initiated touch, was now holding another child gently without fear. June turned away. Not because she didn't want to see it, but because the tears came too fast. She stepped to the edge of the room, leaned against the doorway, and let herself feel all of it. The swell of something she hadn't been able to name, the ache of knowing how long Asher had waited for this, and the quiet astonishment that it had come so easily, so naturally, as if it had just been waiting for the right room, the right hour, the right silence. And this time, she didn't walk away. She didn't wipe her tears quickly. She didn't apologize. She stayed. Arms crossed, back against the wall, eyes soft with wonder. Behind her, the soft rustle of beanbags shifting, voices rising gently, not loud, not sharp. Just enough to say, "We're here." And in the center of the room, two children, one who hadn't known how to ask for comfort, and one who hadn't needed to be told how to give it, remained in a quiet embrace. No one told them when to stop. No one praised or interrupted. They simply were. And in that simple being, something changed. A corner of the world, once cold and formal, had warmed. Not because it was loud. Not because it was noticed. But because, finally, someone had been touched first. What if we had been held first? There's a moment in life, often quiet, often late, when we begin to ask not what we've done, but what we missed. Not what we've earned, but what we longed for, and never quite received. This story wasn't just about a child. It was about all of us. Because somewhere in each of us lives a younger version, a quiet child, a closed-off teenager, a confused young adult, who once needed something as simple and as revolutionary as a hug. Not a congratulatory one. Not a staged one. Just a real one. We are raised in a world that teaches us to wait. Wait until we're calm. Wait until we're strong. Wait until we've proven we're worthy of comfort. But what if, like June showed, the very thing we were told to wait for was the thing we always needed first? Many of us grew up in families where emotions were managed, not met. Where silence was safety. Where no one talked about the fear that came from being overwhelmed, or different, or too sensitive for the noise of life. And so we coped by tucking our needs away. We made ourselves small. We became easy to handle. But as we get older, the ache returns. We watch the world move quickly. We see younger generations struggle out loud, sometimes loudly, sometimes uncomfortably, and we remember how we stayed quiet. We remember the hugs that never came. The teacher who never asked. The parent who didn't know how. This story is not a wound. It's a window. It reminds us that no matter our age, it's not too late to reach, or to be reached. Not too late to offer the thing we didn't receive. Not too late to learn that presence isn't performance, it's proximity. It's choosing not to look away. And for those of us who wonder if we've missed our moment, maybe our moment is now. To be the one who kneels. To be the one who stays. To be the one who sees and holds, without asking for permission. Because sometimes, healing doesn't start with a breakthrough. Sometimes, it starts with a hug. If you've ever thought that simply being present was enough, remember this. A hug, at the right moment for the right person, and in plain view, can change the way the world sees a human being. Like and subscribe to, and share with us. When was the last time a hug truly saved you, and who gave it to you?